Welcome to CARICOM Matters. I'm Miles Eversley. Thanks for joining us. In this week's program, we examine the recently held AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum, convened by the Government of Barbados and the African Export-Import Bank in collaboration with several regional and international bodies, including CARICOM and the International Trade Center. The forum ended with 14 agreements and memorandums of understanding being signed. These are all intended to deepen economic ties and will form the base for greater bilateral relations, trade and investment linkages between the Caribbean and Africa. CARICOM Matters begins with the CEOs of Export Barbados and Invest Barbados, Mark Hill and Kay Ann Greenidge respectively, as they discuss the forum's origin.
The AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum is an idea birthed out of the CARICOM African Summit that was held back last year, I believe around September or so.
It was thought, but hey, there's no one place where Africans and the Caribbean can really come together to have these deep business conversations. And therefore, a trade forum, a trade and investment forum, was one of the brainchilds of that particular conference 1 year ago. And we moved forward 1 year, and here we are with Active 2022.
We took it, myself and Kay Greenidge from Invest Barbados, and we ran with it. And what has happened out of that in conjunction with the African Export Bank is that we now have this event that for me is historical because, you know, trade between Africa and the Caribbean historically has been about the movement of people, and it was a very successful. It created a lot of wealth, but it didn't create wealth for us. In fact, we were used as tools and instruments for creating wealth for other economies. So it was, transatlantic slavery was all about trade, right? It was all about economic development. But what has happened with this forum now is that we're flipping the narrative, and as opposed to the transatlantic slave trade, we are now doing trade and investment with each other. I'm rebuilding that transatlantic bridge. And really, truly, we see this event in that light, that it is really about rebuilding a bridge between African people, but this time around, not exploitation, not abuse, not the atrocities that happen to African people and us who were brought here, but now, whereby we are moving our capital, and we're moving our talent, and we're now leveraging to create wealth for African people.
And some of the objectives, and obviously under the team, One People, One Destiny, Reimagining and Reuniting, is promoting interbank relations to foster financial payments and financial flows. Developing creative and cultural engagements, promoting trade and investment between Africa and the Caribbean by serving as a platform for market identification and building business partnerships and so on, which is the platform that we provided. Facilitating AfriCaribbean investment by fostering cross-regional exchange of investment linkages, showing what projects are in Africa and what projects are in the Caribbean, and seeing how we can work together to get those projects going for the benefit of both economies. Serving as a platform for disseminating trade and investment information and other products and initiatives of the bank, and supporting those trade and investment initiatives, and this is from the bank's side, obviously. And reducing the counterpart risk perception among both African and Caribbean businesses in dealing with themselves.
You know, one of the key issues we find in Africa particularly was just the lack of information about trading and investment opportunities that exist amongst our neighbors within Africa, let alone the Caribbean. You know, a lot of African investors, a lot of African traders would not think of the Caribbean as a potential market. Similarly, Caribbean exporters and traders may not think of Africa as a potential market, just due to unfamiliarity and being comfortable exporting to markets that they do know. So these kind of forums create the opportunity to identify those opportunities, to highlight the challenges that do exist, whether they're tariff, non-tariff, logistical, financing challenges. And the benefit of the forum is we don't only bring the private sector together, but we bring the policymakers with, so that the private sector players can highlight what the specific challenges are and give the policymakers an opportunity to address those challenges to facilitate trade and investment. So that is what this forum is trying to do. It's a historic forum the first of its kind, and we believe it will be the platform for a very strong relationship between Africa and the Caribbean going forward.
Essentially, the forum emphasized the importance of fostering stronger relations between the private sectors of Africa and the Caribbean. In addition to the keynote presentations and panel discussions, events of the conference were designed to encourage networking between attendees and to showcase African and Caribbean talent, innovation and enterprises. Kayan describes these events.
Some of the main activities, obviously we held a welcome reception, of course, to welcome everybody to Barbados, both from the Caribbean and from Africa. And then we launched into 2 intense days of a forum in terms of many diverse topics, discussions, etc., from culture to banking to sectors like agriculture, fintech. Of course, you had speakers from all of our partners that joined with us to put together the conference, not only the AfriCaribbean Bank, Export Barbados and Invest Barbados, but you had partners from the African Union, from CARICOM, and so on, who would have obviously spoken at the conference to give the thoughts in terms of how important it is to form these linkages now between Africa and the Caribbean. We also had a side program going where persons, companies, businesses, countries were involved in pitching their products, their projects to African investors or to any investors, basically for a more intimate conversation in terms of saying this is my product, this is what it looks like, this is the kind of investment that I want, and so on, in terms of seeking partners. So that was also going at the side along with the 2-day conference. There was also opportunities to have B2Bs, B2Gs, G2Gs meetings, and a lot of these meetings happen. And coming out of those meetings, we have been hearing a lot about different agreements that have been fostered, different conversations that have started, and persons continuing those conversations.
The participants were taken on a number of site visits where the history, heritage, culture, and business enterprises of Barbados were enjoyed.
So we had a number of tours going. We were split into 3 sections. Persons did the Blue Economy, which they took the submarine and was able to view the beautiful underwater of Barbados. Persons then went, another group actually went to the Harson's Cave to view that side of the country. And then the other tours, we actually went through the Carlisle Bay Basin. There was a tour of Parliament. There was a tour of the new Life Science Center that is being almost ready for opening, the Food Science Center, which is being done by Export Barbados. We had intended to go to Cocoa Hill, which is also another coconut project being done in collaboration with ITC, but the rain obviously kind of put a damper on that. But then there were exhibitions of road tennis and so on. So it was a mix of business and culture, so that it showed what the best of Barbados had to offer.
You have heard of the AfriCaribbean Bank and its involvement with the conference. But what is this bank? Why is there an interest in partnering with Caribbean states? To which sectors does it prioritize lending? Yusuf Daya is the AfriCaribbean Bank's Director of AU Act for Relations and Trade Policy, and Eric Monchu Intong is its Head of Mission for Anglophone West Africa. They discuss this subject.
The African Export-Import Bank is a Pan-African multilateral trade finance institution established in 1993 by African states in response to the debt crisis of the 80s, when a lot of the international banks withdrew credit lines from Africa. It was felt important for Africa to establish an Exim Bank that would support African trade. So African states came together along with private sector players to establish a bank that could support the expansion and diversification of African trade. One of the key mandates or functions of the bank is to promote intra-African trade and to promote South-South trade. Africa has a historic dependency on commodity exports, which leaves it vulnerable and exposed to commodity terms of trade shocks and external demand conditions. The bank wishes to support the diversification of African trade away from primary commodities, and a key way of doing that is to support intra-African trade. Currently, intra-African trade as a percentage of Africa's total trade ranges around 14 to 16%. And if you compare this to other regions of the world like Europe or Asia, intra-regional trade in those regions are above 60%. And it helps build some absorptive capacity to withstand external shocks. So the bank is prioritizing the promotion of intra-African trade and South-South trade as a way to diversify Africa's economies, as a way to build an industrial base across the continent, as well as a way to diversify its dependence on external markets.
When the Organization for Africa Unity was being set up in 1963, that is 3 years after a number of African countries had their independence, there was that idea that for Africa to be truly independent, we need to be economically independent. That means we need to be free economically. We need to be economically emancipated. And in the African Export-Import Bank, we were set up to promote that integration among African countries. And we then relook at the true definition of trade among African countries as enshrined in our mandate. And that definition is trade among Africans wherever they are. That is trade among African countries and trade between Africa and Africans in the diaspora. And the Caribbean, or the CARICOM region, is part of the diaspora. We have the same ancestral origin, the same cultural history, cultural heritage, and we thought that the way we can reunite our brothers and sisters in the CARICOM region is by trade, which is part and parcel of the mandate of AfriCaribbean Bank. So how do we do that? We need to encourage investors to come and invest in the CARICOM country, in Barbados, and other Caribbean countries. We need to also encourage Barbadians and other Caribbeans to come and invest in Africa. And that is why we were given the opportunity last year when COVID set out and there was a need for vaccine. The African Union approached AfriCaribbean Bank and requested for support to ensure that the CARICOM community also have the supply of vaccines. And AfriCaribbean Bank issued a guarantee in favor of Johnson & Johnson to import 400 million doses of vaccines into Africa as well as the Caribbean countries. So that gave us the first opportunity of collaboration. We then say, how do we take this forward? That is why in March this year, our president visited and then conceived with the Prime Minister Motley the need for this forum so that we can bring African investors to come and set up businesses here. And it didn't end there. We said if these businesses are being set up, typically a business will be created with a consideration of equity and financing. So the investors will bring equity as part of the capital, but AfriCaribbean Bank should then be able to come in with the debt or the lending, the loans that will accompany the equity so that those investments can be successful. That is why we thought we should conceive this forum, bring African investors together, bring the Caribbean communities together, and then sign a partnership agreement between the African Export-Import Bank and the CARICOM communities that would then allow AfriCaribbean Bank to intervene through its mandate to support investors here. So typically, we look at what is available, what we call the low-hanging fruits by way of sectors. Of course, naturally, because of the beauty of Barbados, because of the beauty of the Caribbean community, tourism comes to mind first. We have a specialized program which allows us to finance the construction of hotels and other tourism facilities to accommodate the influx of tourism. So tourism is a key one. We also look at the fishing industry. Today, we're marveled and surprised by these statistics that Africa imported a lot of fish from other continents, whereas the CARICOM community is awash with so much fish, having been surrounded by the ocean. So this is, again, another area where export of fish can move from the CARICOM region to Africa. Instead of us buying from outside, from other countries or other continents, this is another low-hanging fruit. There are other service sectors. one of the things that we consider like our bread and butter is the support we give to financial institutions. AfriCaribbean Bank operates with and through financial institutions. That because we are set up to promote and facilitate and finance trade, the way to do it to reach as many as possible SMEs, corporates, and governments is to work with the financial institutions. So part of the sector which we can also consider is the financial sector. We actually provide short-term facilities to banks in our member countries. Today we have 52 African member countries who provide financing to those banks, because we know that there are entities that can benefit from the facilities of AfriCaribbean Bank directly, but there are others that are rather too small and may not meet the risk acceptance criteria of AfriCaribbean Bank to borrow directly from AfriCaribbean Bank. That's why we channel this funding through lines of credit to financial institutions. So if the local banks here in Barbados approach us for financing, once this partnership agreement is established, we'll be able to channel that funding so that they can in turn on lend to the small and medium-sized enterprises that will benefit from the process of these facilities.
All towards advancing trade between African and Caribbean countries, yes? But to what extent does trade currently take place between Africa and the Caribbean?
The truth of the matter is that the trade between Africa and the Caribbean is negligible. If we look at the share of total exports of the Caribbean in Africa's export basket, it's around 0.1%. And conversely, Caribbean exports to Africa only constitute 1% of total Caribbean exports, which is negligible. We're looking at total trade probably marginally over $1 billion between the region. Yet, and also very concentrated trade, it has to be said, largely in minerals and chemicals. And again, also largely concentrated between countries. So I think it's Bahamas and Trinidad, which is the major export traders to Africa, and then to the major trade partners in Africa seem to be concentrated in North Africa and Southern Africa, leaving an entire continent unutilized or opportunities not taken advantage of. During our conference, there will be a report that will be launched by the International Trade Center, which would look at trade and investment opportunities. There's an estimate that immediately, trade can be doubled, just taking advantage of opportunities that currently exist. And then if we take opportunities that we can create for ourselves through increased investment in tourism, agriculture, financial services, if we can reduce the barriers of trade between Africa and the Caribbean, which remain quite high. The Caribbean economies have duty-free access into many regions, particularly the North American region. Hence, the focus has always been where there's duty-free access, because Caribbean exporters can be competitive in those markets. Similarly, for Africa, our focus has largely been China, Europe, and the US, because we enjoy preferential access into those markets. We can be competitive. Yet, we do not enjoy preferential access into each other's markets. The Caribbean doesn't enjoy preferential access into Africa, nor does Africa enjoy preferential access into the Caribbean market. So a free trade agreement or a trade agreement between Africa and the Caribbean can reduce some of these barriers and help to stimulate that trade. The Caribbean is very strategically located, not only as a gateway to North America, but the entire Americas region, South America, and the rest of the Caribbean. Barbados in particular could be a very important gateway for African exporters, African investors, to exploit the North and South American markets. So we believe that if that cooperation can take place, an agreement could be facilitated between Africa and the Caribbean, these trade and investment opportunities would follow. Certainly, removing tariffs tomorrow is not just going to unlock this huge potential in trade. There's a lot of investment that needs to go. And I'll give you an example. Probably the most binding constraint to trade at the moment is transport and logistics between Africa and the Caribbean. Because trade is so minimal, the routes don't exist. If I want to travel to Barbados, like I did from Egypt, I had to fly through New York and come to Barbados. My colleagues are coming through the UK, different regions of the world. There's no direct flights, makes it difficult for business to happen. There's no direct shipping routes between Africa and the Caribbean either. because the demand for that trade, it doesn't exist. So once you create that demand, you create demand for the infrastructure, you create demand for the logistics to come into place, and that can unlock a lot of the trade.
So the three things that we're really looking to come out of this event is, one, rebuilding the sea bridge, that we're moving goods and services back and forth between each other in a direct way. Rebuilding the air bridge. So I'm really happy to see Ethiopian Airways, which was last year when it brought Emperor Selassie. It's a chartered flight, but at least symbolically, what it's showing us is that the ability to fly directly from Africa and to come straight to Barbados and back is within our reach. So the conference have a lot of positive spin-offs for us in that sense. And then finally, when it comes to the banking, a lot of our banking has to go through Canada and America and stuff like that for us to move money, intermediary banking. And that's where the African Exim Bank comes in.
Trade finance is, we like to say, it's the oil that oils the machine for the wheels to move, for trade to move. In Africa, we know the constraints estimated at around $120 billion annually for trade finance. The Caribbean, which shares a lot of similar characteristics with Africa, also has a deficit in trade financing. We know that new regulations and customer compliance requirements have seen a lot of commercial banks, international banks, looking to de-risk, withdrawing from markets in the Caribbean and Africa that they consider too risky. So trade finance remains a constraint, but that's why you have institutions like the African Export-Import Bank that is stepping up to address some of those gaps and ensure that the trade financing is available, leveraging our international partners, leveraging our Caribbean partners, African partners, to make sure that the trade exists and the finance is available to support it.
The joint declaration of the inaugural AfriCaribbean Trade and Investment Forum suggests that we have made strides to foster stronger relations, not only between governments, organizations and institutions, but the private sectors of both regions. Kian illustrates how the forum exceeded hopes.
Active has surpassed our expectations. With the amount of agreements we've heard have been signed, have been made, the amount to come, that we know conversations are ongoing. The amount of, I'll give you an example. This morning I had a meeting with a business person from Nigeria who had delays getting here, but they were so interested in coming. And although they landed here after Active was finished, they still wanted to have those conversations and wanted to have those linkages to businesses in Barbados and projects in Barbados and so on. And they just had to have the meeting. So this morning, despite the end of Active, it continued. I went, we had a business meeting, and we now have to put her in contact with things like the Small Business Association, Export Barbados, and so on. So that in itself shows us that this conference has been a tremendous success, that this conference has opened so many doors for both the Caribbean and the Africa region, and the conversation can only continue. This is but the first step. This is but the first step.
It's like one people, one destiny, yeah, reimagining. That's not just a slogan. We've actually experienced that. You know, interacting with the team from the Exim Bank has been fantastic. Everybody's experts at the table. Everybody wants the best. We're challenging each other to deliver the best, to produce the best. And that's the kind of team that you want to be on, right? And then the African Union is on board. International Trade Center, ITC, is on board. We also have CARICOM on board. We also have Caribbean Development Bank on board as well. And the list goes on and on and on. So the key thing that we need, especially small developing islands and economies that are emerging, is collaboration. And what this conference really points to, it was unprecedented collaboration at every level. It's just mind-blowing.
You know, I'll tell you something. I was speaking to some of my Caribbean friends just this morning, in fact, so it's quite coincidental you're asking the question. When we started this exercise, we'd greet each other, good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon. As we moved along, it came good afternoon, friends. Good morning, friends. And you know, now that we're in the Caribbean, and I'm confident that when we leave here on Saturday, it will be good afternoon, my brother. Good afternoon, my sister. So we've really built a very strong relationship with our colleagues, our counterparts. The support and the enthusiasm is what builds it. I think we, as a community, as a global community, we realize Africa and the Caribbean, we share history, we share culture, we share identity, we even share food in many respects. And we see how the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ukraine crisis, has created very clear lines around the world on where you stand. And you need to build these relationships. And Africa and the Caribbean can collaborate on building those relationships to diversify our trade and become more integrated and more dependent on each other rather than external partners.
And certainly that is supported by CARICOM. In the coming weeks, we will discuss the agreement signed and how they may help in realizing those hopes for future collaboration. Until next time, I'm Miles Eversley. Do take care and thanks for your time.